And the computer is recording.
Would you please, Catherine, would you please clap your hands very loudly? Thank you very much. No, stop. Catherine, I didn't ask you to do it. Catherine, please do it by yourself, please. Mark. Thank you very much, dear. All right, whenever you're ready, please introduce yourself first.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm Catherine. I'll let everyone introduce themselves.
I'm Yo.
I'm Anna Hazelwood.
Tristan Judas. John Cato.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
We're good to go? All right. Well, here's our presentation on what we found about distracted driving. So I'm going to start with what we put together for our sort of problem definition and how we went through it. So we identified that despite the availability of mobile applications and the settings on lots of phones, that distracted driving still continues to exist, which we wanted to look at how that plays into our target audience or target market kind of thing. So we also were taking into consideration for sure the environment of the decision making. So not only decision making, but also maybe like how they would respond to us when we're trying to ask them about their actions behind the wheel. So things that we identified were while driving, there's this pressure to be connected or to be efficient with your time, which a lot of people will identify with in terms of distracted driving. A lot of times their attitudes about the subject don't necessarily match their action. Why are you laughing? Oh, I was like, did I say something wrong? So their attitudes don't necessarily match their actions in that they might say that they feel that driving distracted is a bad thing, but they will actually do it. They also underestimate the consequences as well as the frequency of their actions. So looking at our data, we had to be aware that they, will say that they might do it less than they actually do, and also that when making the decision to drive distracted, a lot of times the consequences that people think of are not necessarily as drastic or as bad as they really are. So we were looking at some possible questions that we wanted to answer through our different forms of research, and we identified we wanted to figure out on the RIT campus specifically how prevalent is the distracting driving problem and how many people really do drive distracted on this campus. We also wanted to know what people's current actions as well as their attitudes, so how they currently feel and what they currently do with regards to distracted driving. And then finally, are people aware of those preventative measures that we spoke about, the mobile applications and settings, are they aware of what's available to them? So then we were thinking about secondary research and what our objectives were by conducting this kind of research. And we wanted to understand the distracted driving problem from a broad perspective. By broad perspective, I mean not just the RIT campus, which is a majority of where our research was conducted. We also wanted to know what is currently being done to prevent these actions. So who out there is trying to stop this distracted driving, and what are they saying are the best ways to potentially eradicate, if you will, distracted driving. So then we just quickly, our methods of data collection. We had one of our group members perform an observational study to answer that question of how prevalent distracted driving is on the RIT campus, as well as a survey to understand the attitudes that I mentioned before about distracted driving, as well as their awareness of those mobile products. So just to go a little bit into what we identified as some major problems with the attitudes and the behavior of distracted driving. We looked at both the theory of reasoned action as well as the theory of planned behavior, and we actually looked a little bit into one of the sociological theories that we felt was really important. So the theory of reasoned action, how it kind of applies to distracted driving is that, so the way it works is that behavioral intentions, which come right before the actual action that you're going to perform, are a function of the information that you have and the beliefs about performing that action, and they will lead to this specific behavior. So with regards to distracted driving, the attitude, it's the beliefs and the weighted evaluation of those beliefs. So if I think that texting and driving is efficient, like how much do I weigh that against texting and driving is dangerous? And the weight that you give to those beliefs is going to affect whether or not you follow through with the behavior, as well as the subjective norm, which is like, so I see my friends doing it, and I see what happens to them, and so I sort of apply that to myself. Or you see how others around you feel about it, and you decide whether you're going to comply with that. So if my parents tell me not to do something, if I'm going to comply with that, or if I don't deem that a good enough sort of expectation, and I will not conform to that. And then there's a theory of planned behavior, which is pretty much what I just said, except they add in the idea of perceived behavioral control. So that if you have these beliefs and the resources and opportunities for performing the given behavior, that will affect your final behavior. The one thing that has to be noted about the theory of planned behavior is that it is possible to separate the beliefs and treat them as a separate determinant of what you're going to do. So that's kind of how it applies to distracted driving, is that often you can separate or compartmentalize your beliefs. So even if I feel that it's dangerous and that, I tell my friends not to do it, I can set that aside when it affects me, and I'm not going to take it into account when I'm thinking about if I'm going to text and drive or be distracted when I'm driving, even though I might tell my friends, or even though my subjective norms might say that I shouldn't do it. Is this one of those like cut times? Just cut this out. Don't include this. All right, and then finally, we have the idea of pluralistic ignorance. So for a norm to be perpetuated, for it to continue to occur, it is not necessary for everyone, the majority, to support it. Only for the majority to believe that the majority supports it. And this is something that, through our secondary research, I found, is that a lot of people attribute texting and driving specifically, probably most likely distracted driving in general, to this idea of pluralistic ignorance, is that if I think that everyone believes that it's wrong, it doesn't matter. Like not everyone has to say that distracted driving is wrong. They just have to sort of believe that everyone is doing it, and then it makes it okay. So if I think that an entire group is, it's sort of like, it's not me, it's everyone else. So why am I, I can't make a difference. So this is sort of a funny cartoon, because I kind of had a hard time wrapping my head around like how pluralistic ignorance sort of works. So this idea is like everyone's thinking, I'm not going to agree, and then one person agrees, so then everyone does. And so it often, the group theory is that, all of my friends text and drive, so why shouldn't I? All of my friends do their makeup when they're driving, so why shouldn't I? Even if in my head I believe that it is not the correct thing to do, I'll rationalize it by looking at what the majority does, not necessarily what they believe. And now I'm going to pass it on to you, who's going to talk about our secondary research.
Okay, I haven't speak English for like a week, so I'll try. Here are some types of distraction when you're driving. So the first two are texting and using a cell phone or smartphone while you're driving. Following are some other reasons, like doing makeup or reading, including maps. Here are some key facts and statistics. The number of people killed in distracted affected crashes are decreased a little bit, slightly, but the estimated people injured in automobile are increasing by 9% until 2011. And 11% of all drivers under the age of 20 involved in fatal crashes were reported as distracted driving at time of the crash. Following are some facts that contribute to this fact. This is a map. If you look into the orange one, these are the states that saw the overall emphasis on distracted driving. The orange one are states that ban texting while driving, and the blue one are states that both that ban both text driving and cell phone driving. So you can see the blue one is much smaller. The number of the states is much smaller than the orange one, and the white one is neither. So the state doesn't ban text driving and a cell phone while driving.
Wait a minute, are we saying that the blue ones are saying you can't have a phone in your hand?
Yes, the blue one are saying like you cannot texting and you cannot like hold the phone while driving.
All right, go on.
So like 7 states saw the overall emphasis on the distracted driving stay about the same. Here are some obstacles to prioritizing distracted driving. The first, so this is a national. I found that from online from a national survey. So all the states and DC, Washington DC are included. So the first three obstacles to prioritizing distracted driving are lack of funding for enhancement and the lack of funding for media and lack of funding for education. So like for New York State in detail, the first three obstacles overlapped with the national survey. So we are talking about lack of funding for enhancement. So we are going to see like how the states like do they have the laws for distracted driving? 11 states and the DC ban handheld cell while driving, including New York State, and 41 states plus DC ban text while driving, including New York State. Like 47 states and DC have distracted driving laws, while only 8 have distracted driving related laws. By saying distracted driving related laws, I mean it was defined like reckless driving, careless and prohibited driving, like some and inattentive while driving or failure to maintain control of vehicle. So these are some distracted driving related laws. I mean, probably the state have the distracted driving law, but they don't have some related laws. So how to enforce the law is not so clear to the related organizations.
Okay.
Here is a survey for specifically for New York State, like how they enforce the distracted driving law. New York State said it has a distracted driving law, and the law enhancement are utilizing grant funds and the state resources to enforce the state's distracted driving laws. In addition, the city of Syracuse, New York, participated in the NHTSA demonstration project in 2010 to help curb distracted driving.
Do you know what the NHTSA stands for?
Yeah, I checked it and I put it in the note, but now I cannot see that. I forgot about that. Yeah, yeah, thank you. So let's talk about education and media. So here are some educations that states are implement and some media ways they are using. So there are some public education efforts. 47 states and DC by 2012. They say they have some public education effort. Like New York State, they are putting some tagline, like put it down when you see the people, like you told them put it down while you see people texting or held a cell phone while driving. And they have some social media and websites to most states have the social media and website to help you like educate you on distracted driving. Like most of them are using Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube or some web portals that are designed by their own state. They have some teenager and parent education and training. Nearly half of the states included in the survey said they have this kind of special training. And there are some special website address for additional material, like I said, in the social media and the website. And also there the state a partnership with employers, like they have some distracted driving policies. New York State said yes, they do have this. They do cooperate with some employers to have some distracted driving policies. And there are some research efforts with college and universities, like New York State does. Like what we did here is like one of them. And our state agencies and private organization. So I think like New York Aid Council is like one of these agencies, that non-profit agencies that help prevent distracted driving. Here is a graph that that shows the percentage of distracted driving involved in fatal crash by age 2008. So under 20 and 20 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, these people are like almost half of the percentage. So we are doing the observation in RIT, and also we are trying to focus on this group of people.
Is there something that you can take away from this graph?
I think yeah, like people under 49 is like more young, and they're like more busy in social media stuff or texting people, holding a cell phone.
Yeah.
While people like older, they are like old traditions, so they are just driving.
But also probably they could be a part of the fatal crashes by the people who are younger. So like someone age 70 and over could have been a part of a crash, but they weren't the one that was distracted.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of, for one thing, you have to think about when you get like numbers like this, it's always important to think about the fact that how many of these people are there. Like for instance, right now, the people between about 35 and about 50, there's not that many of those people who are in America because of Generation X. There's just not that many of those people. There's a lot of baby boomers who are over 50 or 55 or so.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of young folks, right? I mean, because that's the way it works. So, I mean, the fact that you're getting numbers like this goes to show you that it may be a little more normalized than we thought. You know, I mean, not exactly look like if the chart looks like this, and I'm telling you there's not as many people in the middle, then perhaps the numbers are just more normalized than we first thought. You know?
Yeah, it's that the percentage that distracted drivers involved in fatal. So are all these people drivers, or do you think they are probably passengers?
Oh, that's another good point. That's another good point. I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking about like drivers only, right? Now, the way I'm reading this is drivers,
I think it
right?
is.
Yeah, I think it's
That's the
drivers.
way I'm reading it. In other words, if you have someone in the car with you, that's not going to be figured into statistics. I mean, it's just like, but what if? I mean,
But
the
two
thing
drivers
that
can be
distracts
involved.
me the most are my kids in the back seat,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, that's an important thing. There's a lot of things to be thinking about when you see a chart like this. This is a good chart. Let me make sure that you guys get this.
Yeah,
Well, you guys can send me the thing anyway. This is
Yeah, you
good.
have that in Dropbox.
Yeah. Go on. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's fine. So what I get from this graph is like teenagers are more and more involved in this kind of distracted drivers, teenagers and young adults. So I think we should like focus on this group of people and do more surveys and observations to them. And then we'll talk more about this.
Okay, so April is Distracted Driving Awareness Month, as advertised by the National Safety Council. They actually published a white paper on brain distraction and cognition while driving, and they actually started a LinkedIn group for employer cell phone policy. It's invite only, and it only has 137 members, but it is a group. And they did have quarterly newsletters on it, but they stopped in July of 2013. I really have no idea why, which I went through some of the newsletters. They were actually quite interesting. And they have like packets for employers to give to their employees, hang up posters around the office, that sort of thing. And they do host seminars. I think they have a couple in New Jersey this month. They have a minimum of 81,000 crashes. I did not say that correctly. In 2012, that involved text messaging only, and a minimum of 1.2 million in 2012 that involved talking on a cell phone. And they actually conducted a study, and it was in the white paper, that it showed decreased activity in the parietal lobe on 37%. And what they did was they had someone on speakerphone while... while they were driving, and they analyzed the, sorry, you distracted me. And they analyzed their brain activity, and it decreased. And they actually found that vocal communication affects your visual attention, but obviously if you have loud music, it's going to deter from your driving with sirens and emergency vehicles and that sort of thing. And here's a couple of infographics I pulled off their website. And they found that the total of fatal crashes in New York was 1,092. And it's just a bunch of information on increasing employer liability. And I believe Chevy is having a policy, I believe it's Chevy, on the best policies that cover, and they say all employees cannot use a company car, they cannot use a company phone, and they cannot use it. Basically, if it's work-related, they can't do it, otherwise it's going to put them at risk, and they have to sign a document when they're hired. And FARS, the Fatality Analysis Reporting System, reported that distracted driving increased from 10.5% in 1999 up to 15.8% in 2008. It's almost a full decade, but you have to think about the technology switch as well. And individuals driving alone increased from 60.4% to 65.5% in the same period. And in between 2006 and 2007, text messaging overall increased 136%, and then the following year it increased 117%. And based on these statistics, FARS analyzed that the regression estimated fatalities up to 75.6% per million text messages.
Wow.
And there's the link to the study on the bottom.
Okay, thank you very much.
And what they found, based on a different study, Walter conducted it, is the brain cannot multitask. They actually call it attention switching. You can't focus on two different things at once, and this can increase up your crash risk up to 4 times. And drivers with passengers are actually least likely to be distracted because passengers are more likely to say, hey, your exit's up here, or there's a red light, versus if you're talking on your cell phone and you're distracted because they can't see what you're seeing. And they're actually more likely to fail up to 50% of their driving environment if they're talking on their cell phone because they're thinking about who's on the phone versus what's in front of them. And obviously, social cues don't translate well through the phone. I'm going to hand it off.
So our first qualitative analysis that we did was a Qualitrix survey. Our overall objective of this survey was to understand why people drive distracted, their viewpoints on other distracted drivers, and whether or not they are open to making the roads safer through different mobile applications and settings. Overall questions we look to answer, is distracted driving acceptable in our community? Does purchasing or leasing your car factor into being a distracted driver? Why do or don't use your mobile device while driving? What people are you more likely to answer to while being distracted? Are people familiar with driving mode settings and applications that Katie had mentioned before? Do they use these settings? And if they don't and they haven't heard of them, would they use them if they knew about them? And the last one is, what is the largest distraction to drivers? So as of last night, at least, we had 81 responses to our survey. 43 different occupations were represented. 41% were driving 6 to 15 years, 31% 26 plus years. Which actually, if we go back to that other graph that you was showing, I mean, it shows how young people we were analyzing compared to how old. And 94% actually owned their own car. 77% were purchasing. After looking at our study, we thought that this could possibly make them care more about their car. If you look at the results that I'll show you later, it seems that a lot more of the people admitted to not really driving distracted. So this is also a link to the survey if anybody would like to fill it out.
I will. What I will do is I will send it to them
That'd
both
be great.
on data and on paper.
Okay,
All
great.
right.
So I took some, what in my opinion, were some of the more important data statistics from the survey. The first one was how often, if ever, do you use your phone or mobile device while driving? As you can see, the majority of them, sometimes they would use their mobile device. 35% rarely use their mobile device. When asked why did you use it, I used the check all that apply method.
Do you
And
think they're lying, John? I mean, just looking at that. I mean, 43% admit to sometimes.
I was gonna say, that goes back to what I was saying, like this, just the psychological and like social that we looked at.
yeah,
Is like that, you know, you always, that their attitudes don't reflect their actions, and they don't really want to admit to those actions because they truly might not believe that it's the best thing, but they keep doing it anyway. So probably more of those sometimes or never, or always.
yeah.
I mean, see, it depends on what you call that, because remember, only 9% of people said never, 12% of them said all the time. So what I think is that sometimes means all the time too.
Yeah.
And rarely means sometimes, and never might damn well mean
Rarely.
maybe rarely.
Rarely, yeah.
You know, that's just my intimation. But what do you think? I mean, you've done the background research. What do you
9%
think?
don't.
I mean, yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah. Well,
That's the only
so
thing
what
that
happened
they don't
was,
have
in the survey itself, I don't think the specific question was, do you have a cell phone, but I said we got 81 responses. Only 74 are shown right there because I can't remember the question that I used.
You didn't answer it,
But, well, there was a question that I used that, yeah, it took them out of the equation, and they ended up, actually their survey was a lot shorter. They ended up answering like one like fill in the blank question because, in my opinion, their data wouldn't really help us out. So people admitted that it was convenient. I asked them why you would use your cell phone. A lot of people said it was convenient for them. I mean, it actually surprised me how many people checked I just wanted to. As you can see, there's 24 people who checked I just wanted to. So, I mean, this isn't really the most reliable one right here. Maybe people were
Well, I think that
joking or,
well,
I don't
no,
know.
I mean, I think that those people are probably the honest ones.
I guess.
And other people, like, they use some kind of they use some kind of limiting condition to be able to tell themselves it's okay to do this. But those folks just said, hey, listen, I know it was a traffic jam in the middle of winter. I still wanted to talk on the phone or get on the phone.
I mean, ideally, we would want everybody to say it was an emergency because
Right.
it would mean that maybe they were good people, but no. So here's our next slide for it. So this was a really important one. So how often, if ever, do you see other people using their mobile devices while driving? So as you can see, everyone sees other people using their mobile device while driving. No one answered rarely or never.
Which kind of neglects someone saying that they maybe rarely or never use. Like if you try to compare this, not that they're always seeing each other.
Yeah.
But if you say like, can that many people say I never do and have 0% say I've never seen someone?
Exactly.
Very interesting.
I never do it, but I see other people do it
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
So,
So another thing that actually Tristan came up with this question is, did your driving examination include questions or information about using smart or mobile devices while driving? And this is pretty important because it tells us that the people who are driving on the roads right now, or at least the people that we got surveys from, never really, when they took their permit tests or driving tests or what have you, none of this was ever addressed. Cut.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go rolling.
So that might be something important. I mean, it says that 6 people said that they did get these questions, so maybe those were the younger kids who filled out the survey. But it might, I don't know, a suggestion could be maybe they give retests for permits, I don't know, and includes stuff like this. So 57% said there are more people there more likely to respond to a text from while driving. And the top responses were pretty consistent. We had some jokes in there, like a lot of people who I sent the survey to put my name. Um,
Yeah, that'll do that.
yeah,
Now you know
so,
about that. They do stuff like that all the time.
Yeah.
You know, they think they're funny.
yeah, so, but for the most part, it was mother, father, whether it was significant other, husband, boyfriend, and there were very few work ones. There were a couple, but not as many as I would have expected.
Okay.
57% of the respondents have not even heard of the driving mode or application, which that was kind of bizarre to me until, well, actually, when I had asked the gentleman on the Rochester Ad Council about it, they weren't that familiar with it, so I guess it's really not that out of the ordinary. So the people who have heard of it, 38% of those people use it. And I asked them why wouldn't they use it? Lack of convenience, laziness, the fact that it restricts your phone access, and the fact that they don't know its capabilities were all reasons why they didn't use it. The people who haven't heard of it, it said that 61% would actually be interested in using it. And the top 3 largest distractions to drivers were texting, checking social media, and talking on the phone. And talking on the phone was without a headset, yes.
Okay, so I did our observational research here on the RIT campus. I performed it today from 11:40 a.m. to 12:40 p.m. At the corner of Andrews and Tyler Street, which is S Lot for those of you familiar with RIT's campus. We had a total of 228 vehicles come by, and first let's just go over some assumptions I made while doing the research. First, I only counted a driver distracted if I could visibly see the phone in their hand, but I made an exception for drivers who are wearing headphones while they were driving, as I considered that also distracted driving. Maybe they had the phone in their lap, maybe they were just listening to music. Whatever it is, their full attention was not on the road.
Were you visible when you did this?
I have a picture of where I was sitting. I was in a parked car, and I was looking out into the intersection.
They couldn't see that you had like a clip.
No, they couldn't see anything that I had that I was taking. It just looked like I was sitting in my car.
Yeah, the picture's on the next slide.
Yeah, I counted the RIT employees going by, whether it's a bus driver, or the facilities manager, or even the people in the little golf carts, mostly because those are people who are driving on RIT's roads all the time. So even if they're on the clock, if they're on their cell phone, it should count. I attempted not to count the same vehicle twice, but with the way the intersection was set up, how the other part of it was a U, I feel like some cars might have slipped by in the time that I might have counted them more than once. I also didn't count cars that had heavily tinted windows that I couldn't see like the distinct facial features or any sort of hands of the person because I wasn't able to tell whether or not they had their phone. And I didn't count motorcycles because if they're driving with a cell phone on a motorcycle, they have a death wish. And that's really not any of my business. So you go to the next slide. Over here you can see my position. I was facing straight out into the intersection. I had a very clear view of everybody going all 4 directions. A lot of the time with them turning, I was able to see them in 2 different directions, so I had a really good indication of whether or not they were holding their cell phone. Of the 228 drivers, 220 of them were what I considered to be not distracted. So they didn't have their cell phone in their hand, they weren't wearing headphones. 8 of them, which is 3.5%, were distracted. Of those, 6 of those were holding their cell phone, and 2 of them had headphones in. That 3.5% is actually lower than the Rochester Ad Council's findings that had it at 4.9%. But then I looked at the one for the Marketplace Mall intersection, and I consider that an outlier because it was 15 percentage points higher than any of the other ones. So taking that one out and counting the 9 other locations, I had the Rochester Ad Council tabulated at 3.05%, which RIT is higher than by about half a percentage point. And then, knowing that the Rochester Ad Council didn't consider headphones to be distracted driving, only visible cell phones in the hand, we were lower than the 3.05%. It was about 2.63 of only people holding cell phones. So we were a little bit lower than what they had, and that's still with the outlier removed of the Marketplace Mall intersection. And that was
And there's our resources. So.
conclusions, guys. I mean, tell me, this is the part where the rubber hits the road. You came in here and you had a whole lot of research questions. You had a life level background. What do you conclude about this distracted driving?
If I could just say one thing, based on how we were looking at the younger demographic and how a lot of our statistics that they found in secondary research pointed to the younger age group being on their phone more, I expected more drivers on our campus to be holding their cell phone or to be visibly talking on the phone, any of that sort of thing. I was kind of surprised that only 8 people out of the 228 that passed me by were holding their phone, especially with me parked so close to a parking lot. I figured that people coming out of the parking lot were letting people know that they'd be leaving class, they'd be changing the music on their phone to get ready for the drive ahead, and I was frankly a little bit surprised that the number wasn't higher on our campus.
Another factor that you have to kind of put into that is on a campus, it's a much more secure environment. So there's campus safety officers everywhere, and people know that there's campus safety officers everywhere. If I'm talking about myself personally, I don't speed when I go around the circle, but I might speed a little when I'm off campus, mostly because I know that there's campus safety officers lurking around every corner, and there's a greater probability of me getting caught. So that might have factored into
Also the low driving, like the distance.
exactly. Is it worth it to pick up your phone for the 2 minutes you're going to be on campus?
I feel like it might be a case-by-case basis with something like that, because while driving on campus, I drive a little fast because I'm more afraid of the sheriffs than I am of the campus safety officers. I feel like they're not a threat to me. Sheriffs set up really good speed traps. Campus safety officers, not so much. You can see them from a mile away. Same thing with texting. I'm afraid of getting pulled over by a sheriff with my phone in my hand on the main roads. But on RIT, I feel if I keep it low enough, and I'm one of the people who answered always to the texting while driving, I don't feel as worried on campus with my phone, especially coming out of the parking lot, going between my apartment and my girlfriend's apartment, keeping in contact with all the other people I know on campus. Going to meetings or something like that, I feel like having my phone and like checking the meeting place, seeing that everybody's going to be there, and if I'm on time or not, is something that I do a lot on campus.
I think from a broader perspective, I guess, rather than just our observational research, if we were to look at sort of the questions we were trying to answer, including the availability of these phone settings and how they might affect your texting and driving behavior, distracted driving behavior. Mostly, obviously, we looked at phones because that seems to be the most prevalent version of distracted driving. But I think that was extremely highlighted by our findings in that 61% said that if they knew about it and they knew that it would help, they are interested in using it. And I think it also, another really broad question that we wanted to answer that was definitely highlighted was kind of more affirming what we know about psychology and sociology, in that, a lot of people said that that they don't do it when they definitely do, and you could see it when we compared the I don't drive distracted, but I always see people driving distracted, and a lot of what we sort of speculated was definitely confirmed. And I think USGRAPH also showed that, like you said during the presentation, that it might just be like this is the norm, and obviously that's not a good thing, but that it's texting and driving or distracted driving in general is just kind of the way people think that they need to get the things done they need to get done.
Let me ask you guys one last question. I'll make it so long now that we just kind of tied up. These guys have made the case pretty much from what I'm hearing, and that it's not going to be Karen, it's going to be sick. In other words, in order to get people to stop doing this, as much as you can show people the benefit of not doing distracted driving, I mean, I think the big role is police presence.
Yeah.
And people have some kind of negative outcome. Is that what you guys agree with? Would you agree with that? In terms of making policy in the future, would you agree with the fact that it's going to fix showing people the negative outcomes?
So do you mean like people, the reason that people don't text driving or using cell phone while driving because of the police officer?
Could be police officers, could be, because people believe that
they would pay some significant fine or something like that. In other words, they think that when they do distracted driving, they probably think that nothing bad is going to happen to them if they do this.
Yeah, I think so. What Rochester Area Council did, I think more awareness needed to be aroused. People should prevent taxi driving, should prevent distracted driving by themselves, other than forced by other people. So yeah, so I think more social media or education will definitely need it, and also community are different from other communities, and states are different from other states. So I think if a certain corporation organization want to actually prevent distracted driving, they should cooperate with this certain organization and do a survey within their organization and see what they can do.
Well, I'm from Rochester, so when I think of distracted driving, I think of those girls that were hit by the semi-truck a few years back, and it was related to texting, and that's when this whole distracted driving thing really caught fire. So when I think of negative consequences, that's really what I think of. Obviously, if you're not from Rochester, most people are not going to make that connection. So if I think that was played up a little bit more, not that we really want to harm those families and bring up those raw feelings, but it's not just a simple text like, hey, I'll be there in 10 minutes. You can just leave your phone instead of getting hit by a semi, you know?
Yeah. That played a huge role, I think. I mean, everybody who's seen that commercial, they remember that.
I mean, it was all over the news, and then it was passed through New York State. It was a really big thing.
Well done, guys. Good job. I'll give you some comments a little bit later on after I patch everything up and send it to those guys. I will make the video available to you as well, so you can give it a look, and I'll give you my comments, and I'll give you comments on every phase of your research. But well done. Good job. Thank you, guys.
I thought it was ironic that on the way back from New Jersey to